Joining us here live from UFC Ottawa is a man who is known around the MMA community for his innovative and in-depth MMA analysis. You may know him from his awesome breakdowns on the Fight Network. Robin Black, thanks for joining us here today.
Hey guys, good hanging with you guys over the phone.
Yeah, well, it's always good, man. So let's kick it off because we know you're short on time. Let's kick it off on the first fight we want to break down from this crazy event. Calderwood versus Letourneau in the women's flyweight, the first flyweight fight in the UFC. I mean, it really delivered, Robin, in terms of the first fight in the division. Very, very exciting, but some controversy as well. Can you tell us, before we get into those controversies, what did you think of the fight and Calderwood's performance winning this one?
Well, I think Calderwood looked great. I mean, it's a hard one to talk about without just mainly talking about the controversy because there was such a huge part of the fight. And I think a lot of people are misunderstanding what it is. But from my perspective, when I was watching the fight, Calderwood was having a brilliant, 45-second minute in round one, including a spinning back fist, I believe. And I think she had Val finished. And in my opinion, at the time, I stood up and yelled at from where we were, which is not what you're supposed to do when you're media, that journalists should stop the fight immediately. And the fact that she was punched back into consciousness is irrelevant. Every single thing that happened after that moment is irrelevant. You're supposed to stop the fight when she's out. And if you fail to do so, the fight continues. But that is the moment in time when the fight should have been stopped. Now, as you saw the fight go on, now that takes nothing away from JoJo, who had a brilliant fight, and should have had a first-round knockout, I think. And did have a first-round knockout essentially because she concussed Valerie so much. But Val wasn't Val. She won't remember a thing of that fight. And from that point on, you saw her kind of reaching at a close, which wasn't about clothes. And I think a lot of people are like, Reebok outfits, blah, blah, blah. That's probably a concussed fighter kind of having a weird reaction. Feels strange. Not quite sure, what she's kind of doing. And that's what it looked like to me. And as that went on, whether the concussion or probably also a broken rib, which she should not have sustained if it had been stopped at the right time, then at some point she's like, I don't want to fight anymore. Joanne Calderwood did exactly the right thing throughout that fight. She had a brilliant fight. And the ref did, unfortunately. He's a friend of mine. I really like the man. He's done some great work. He's a great reffing instructor. But he shit the bed on this one, and Val got really hurt. Val got really hurt. And he didn't stop it on a couple of occasions where she showed that she wanted the fight stopped, put her hands up, said, I don't want to fight anymore, shook her head, turned her back. She essentially was forced to fight by, again, a good ref and a good person who just didn't identify the sign that was obvious to everybody looking that this fight was over and this woman was quitting. So there's no way to talk about it without that, unfortunately. But Joe had a great fight, and Val, because she is so tough and she is so gutsy, kept fighting and showed her heart. But, that's why we're supposed to have refs, to protect these incredibly resilient, tough fighters from getting injured when they don't need to.
I'm just curious because obviously the first flyweight fight for the women's division in the UFC, and then Calderwood in the post-fight seemed like she may be going back to strawweight. What do you think is the future of this division? Do you think, because obviously, and a lot of people are saying this on Twitter, she's sort of unofficially the champion of the division in the UFC, but it's sort of uncertain where she's going to be in the next fight.
I tend to think whether they do it in the next fight or soon, I think there will be another women's division, maybe two more. It's just business. They need more fights. They have lots of shows. They have shows on pay-per-view and Fox and FS1 and many other places and Fight Pass, and there's no shortage. We need more fights. We need more fights. More divisions start to make sense. So I think it'll happen. What she does next, if they're like, let's give her another 125 or not, I think it's, that's a temporary thing. In the long run, there'll be a 125 division, I'm sure.
For sure. Hopefully they do bring that division in and make it a permanent fixture. There is one interesting thing. Obviously, JoJo had a great performance. Valerie was super tough. That teep at the end where JoJo hit Valerie and it looked like Valerie was hurt. And then in the replay, you actually see that JoJo's heel went into Valerie's top and sort of pulled her top down. I think that may have been one of the moments where it may have been something to do with the actual uniform itself. But it was a very key moment also at the very end of the fight where Valerie turned around. Robin, I just want to clarify with you, do you think that's something that, was brought on by the concussion from the first round?
I mean, it's really hard to say that causation and correlation are different things. So, They're not always something that's correlated or happens at the same time is not always linked to the cause. But you're dealing with somebody who, by all accounts, when you go unconscious and come back conscious, almost all the time you have a concussion. When you have somebody with a concussion, they're not themselves. They're not behaving like themselves. They're not thinking like themselves because they're concussed. So I think it's probably, in my opinion, all connected. I think it was, again, I hate saying it because the man is a dear friend and someone I like, and he's good at his job and he works hard, and he's particularly good as a roughing instructor. But he shit the bed, and that woman got hurt, and that's going to happen because human errors happen when humans do things. He shouldn't be vilified, or people that we don't need overreactions, or what, this guy needs to be fired or this fighter needs to retire. Everybody, we have a tendency in our culture to overreact to things. But the fact is, in this case on this night, that woman sustained more damage than she needed to because of a referee not being able to have a good night. That's human error, and that's something I think Darren will become an even better referee, and he will learn from this. We actually, from where we were, saw Big John speaking to him off to the side for about 20 minutes after it. And that's something normal that is done, especially those two, because they work so closely together. It's sort of a postmortem of the situation, and I'm sure it'll make him a better ref. But I really hope when he talks about it, he says, I screwed that one up. That's what humans do. Sometimes they make errors. It's hard because they're in a role where you want to minimize all the errors, but all humans make errors, and that's part of being a human.
Yeah, certainly a learning experience. I mean, obviously you're there at UFC Ottawa, so we have to ask you about the light heavyweight fight between Steve Bosse and Sean O'Connell. It was an unbelievable fight. A lot of people on Twitter saying it was almost a movie-like fight, just unbelievable in nature what was going on there. You were there live. Tell us your reaction to it. What was the crowd like? What was it like being there for a fight like that?
Yeah, it was bonkers, like absolutely bonkers. The crowd went bananas, like completely ballistic. That's a lot of B's, a lot of B words there. They just went crazy, and as well you should. I mean, it's a strange thing that you're witnessing, because when you really think about what you're witnessing, you're looking at two people who, whether it's because of their enjoyment, it's the thrill of it, it's the feedback from the audience, it's who they are, what it is, they're making a choice to do something to employ the riskiest approach that there is. And in both guys' cases, it's a very rare situation where you have two people who think that way, whether it's a sensation-seeking event, like I said, or, they're just like, this is how I fight. When you get two of them like that, and they both and there's something about Steve. We know Steve a little more. We don't know the real OC. But there's something about Steve where he's kind of this likable guy, and if he can, he had literally hundreds of fights in a hockey league, hundreds, and they all look like that. There's something about him that has the ability to draw another man into that because he's enjoying it so much, and by nature you kind of do. I don't know. It's one of those wild things, but the audience went crazy, and it's I preferred the main event personally, and I know that some people will think I'm stupid or they'll see it differently, but it's impossible not to feel something special. And two people just say, we're going to spend 15 minutes to challenge ourselves on this level and really chase some kind of sensation that very few humans can understand, and do it in front of all of us. I mean, that is a moving, compelling thing. Technically, it's nonsense, but emotionally, it's incredible, and it was incredible. It really was.
Oh, yeah. Well, the emotions were definitely felt. I think anybody who was watching that fight would have enjoyed it unless they, obviously don't have a pulse. And it's crazy to think how badly Steve Bosse got dropped at the first round, and then he ended up coming back to win that fight. I don't know about you, Robin. When I watched that fight, I kind of forgot to score it because I was enjoying it so much. Do you think the right man had his hand raised? Because it was a very close fight that really could have gone either way. I don't know how closely you were scoring it. What do you think?
At the time, I thought Bosse lost the first round and Bosse won the second two. But that's just what I felt like. Like, I thought they're going to hold his hand up because it felt kind of like that. And that is about the shittiest scoring system that exists. So what I'm telling you is what it sort of felt like, which is by no means any kind of official scoring observations, but that's kind of what I felt like. I think a lot of people in the room felt that way. But I don't know if either of those guys do, because the boss kind of really celebrated, and the camera on him, and when you're looking at his face, he was like, wow, I sure hope I won. Neither one of those guys had any idea how they did, other than they just shared something incredibly special that the audience loved too.
Yeah, and O'Connell is a special guy. Obviously, his weigh-ins are hilarious. He has a book out, incredibly a smart guy and great to talk to. So it was definitely a very special performance. Let's jump to the co-main event in the welterweight showing between Donald Cerrone and Patrick Cote. Now, a lot of people talking about how Cote felt like this was going to be his night, how he was going to wanted to go out in the first round and make it a quick fight. He wanted to show off the fact that he has the striking to beat Cerrone on the feet. What did you think about Cerrone's victory, and what did you take away from this one?
I do a podcast called The Mentality of Combat Sports with a sports psychology consultant, David Mullins, and I saw his tweet. He literally said, when Cowboy is fully, switched on and fully mentally in the fight, he really is that good. And I thought that was, pretty bang on. Like, if Cowboy gets himself going the way he needs to, that's what he looks like. The fact that Pat maybe, that it's hard to compare because he didn't show any of the lackadaisical kind of thing. But the same thing, Rockhold looking at this and going, man, I got this. Pat didn't look at it that way, but Pat all week had this real, like, this is my time. And once you start thinking about calling shots and I'm going to finish it this way, that you don't have that control. There's a million variables. There's another man who's trained his whole life who doesn't want to play along with your storytelling that you're going to finish the fight. So when you have a pre-planned outcome, sometimes that goes wrong. But Pat, after literally just said, he was wrong. He said he thought he would just start slow. He thought he could push him back. He thought he would move straight backwards, bunch of things. And he said he was wrong. He didn't use the word underestimate, but he just didn't. He planned for what he believed Cowboy was and what he believed Cowboy would be, and that's not what Cowboy was tonight.
And according to the betting odds, this is a very close fight. And, the key to really beating Cowboy Cerrone is pressure him and don't give him that space to work. And the way Cowboy Cerrone was able to keep Patrick Cote on the outside and really, put on him whatever he wanted. And the fact that he was able to stop Patrick Cote, literally the first man to ever stop Patrick Cote due to strikes. Cote's been stopped due to injury in the past, but never to strikes, is a phenomenal feather in Cowboy Cerrone's cap. I mean, what would you like to see Cerrone do next? He says he doesn't really give a shit whether he's doing welterweight, whether he's fighting at lightweight. Do you think this is the victory that shows, hey, he really can compete with guys at welterweight? We don't know if he can really, win the belt or anything like that, but he can, duke it out with the best of them at 170.
Yeah. Well, I think him putting the takedowns into play early in the fight shaped the rest of the fight. Suddenly, and Pat said that after too, because I didn't expect him to be that good on the ground. Pat's been very dominant on the ground. Pat ran Ben Saunders, who's brilliant on the ground. And so, that shaped it. And when Cowboy is doing that, and when he's complete like that, when he's a full picture, I think he can fight anybody. Maybe not Wonder Boy. Right now, that guy is looking pretty hard to beat. But I hope, when you ask what would you, hope for Cowboy, in my opinion, I would hope to see him get the kind of fights that he wants, which means lots of fights. And we'd all like that. I don't think you'll see him, you never know. If Johnny Hendricks, I would have loved to have seen him fight Johnny Hendricks or something like that. Somebody who, we've talked about at the top, but we're not talking about them moving that way right now. I mean, let him fight those big names.
I'm personally a big fan of him versus Gunnar Nelson. I think that would be a great fight. Yeah. But I guess we'll see what happens there. Yeah,
or Tumenov. I'll throw that one out there as well.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, I guess love it. I don't be surprised to see that one.
Yeah, I guess the big question is, like he said, mentally, when he's all there, he looks great. But when there's a big thing on the line, like a title or a big eliminator fight, we've seen him sort of not be there. So I would just wonder where he's at with that, and if we'll get to see him when everything's on the line, come out there and look the same like he did tonight. But let's talk about the main event, Stephen Thompson versus Rory MacDonald. It's a tough one. It was a throw-up. A lot of people were saying MacDonald was going to do this because of his wrestling skills and the fact that he is a very, very complete complete fighter. On the other side, Stephen Thompson beats Johnny Hendricks in decisive fashion. So much confidence going into this one. Tell me, Robin, before this happened, for the people that haven't watched your breakdowns, who did you think was going to win this one?
Well, I usually don't kind of make picks, but the only place it's because that's something I talk about all the time. There's so many variables. If you just want somebody to guess using the best information that they have, go right ahead, make picks. But there is nobody on earth. You talk to Dan Hardy or Faraz or any of these top-level experts, they'll all tell you they'll do it because it's a mechanism that you use in television or storytelling or writing or whatever. But there's no man on earth who can predict fights because of all the variables. And you can get it right 60% of the time would be pretty good. 70 would be even better. But, that means 3 out of 10 fights you get wrong. So I don't really make picks that much. I like to show all the variables, all the possibilities, show what people might see, what some of the key matchups of physical matchups or technique matchups. And so I saw the fight looking kind of like this. The only place I'm forced to pick is on Fight Network on our preview show. It's part of our assignment. So I picked Wonder Boy. So I was right, but I just kind of picked it. There's no way you could have known this fight. But you could have definitely, you knew what the battles were, and that was Wonder Boy wants to be at distance, and Rory, people are like, oh, he's got to shoot takedowns. The first thing you have to do to get your hands, take somebody down is get your hands on their hips, or your hands joined around their waist on a body lock, or your hand on their leg, or their hand on their foot. And just that's really hard with him. It's really, really hard. That's what he's good at. Same with Dominic Cruz. And that's a world where it has been empty. It hasn't been mined and studied and developed in the mixed martial arts environment. Machida and Wonder Boy, karate itself has a lot of fighting in those ranges. It's not about karate. It's just about the fact that you fight at distance. There's other ways to do it. Dominic Cruz doesn't really do karate. He just fights at distance. So it's not really about the style. Never really about the style. Styles are just limiting factors, limiting concepts. It's just about the fact that outside of that range where you can touch somebody, that fighting didn't happen a lot out there. Why? Because to fight somebody, you got to get close enough to touch them. So most people just kind of surrender that acceptance, wander into range like the Boss did with the real OC. And they did that, and it's really fun. But you know how you'd beat either of those two guys? You beat them the way Wonder Boy fought. So people develop that game. That's the game. And that's what Rory had to beat. Rory tried it with rolling heel hooks to get him. That was brilliant. Rory tried it by trying to cut him off. That was brilliant. Rory tried it by building a shield to come in behind. Brilliant. He pulled guard. He tried everything for 25 minutes, and he couldn't do it because that's how good Stephen Thompson is. And that's the game, the fight, and that's what the matchup was that we were expecting, and that's what we got. And whether you could say, and what you couldn't answer is Rory good enough to get to him in 25 minutes? I was talking to John Anik after, and he's like, I just thought. And John Anik's brilliant. And he's like, I just thought in 25 minutes he could get to him. And so did a lot of people. And that's why you don't make a pick on that fight, because what you're picking in that fight is, can Wonder Boy be almost perfect for 25 minutes with his assignment? Because if he's not almost perfect, Rory could get on top of him and punch him until he's unconscious. There's no way to predict that. But now that we've seen him do it against Rory and get better at it and get more confident in it, the next guy, you'll be even more confident that he can do it. And everybody's going to try to learn how to solve this. But Wonder Boy, Cruz, Holly Holm to a degree, maybe Connor, and that's how he's going to approach the Diaz fight. These people have been working on it for so long, you're too many years behind them to solve it. So it's an interesting thing. It was a beautiful, wonderful fight. I'm just so I'm happy we got to see it.
It was a very technical battle, and you talk a lot about the movement, and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and like you mentioned, Cruz and Holly Holm and Conor McGregor. These are all fighters that really exemplify, those sentiments. I'm just wondering, do you think that this fight gives him more momentum or less momentum? I know Rory MacDonald is a phenomenal fighter, and he just fought Robbie Lawler, but in his last fight, he destroyed Johnny Hendricks in the first round, and here he takes a decision, even though Robbie Lawler was able to stop Rory MacDonald. What do you think this fight does for Stephen Wonderboy Thompson? I think everybody wants to see him fight for the belt, but does it help him or not?
Well, that's outside of the realm of what I am obsessed with, what I study, what I'm studying, what I'm trying to to look at is where this is going, where the next thing and the next thing, and where the fighting is going and how it takes shape. And because we're watching in real time the experimentation of how human beings fight each other, and every skill and technique and approach and stuff that exists in how that happens. That's what I'm interested in. How this is interpreted by a bunch of people who sell pay-per-views, and how they might decide then to make a choice of matching somebody who might then sell certain amounts of tickets to. I don't understand that stuff. I don't know. I don't know about that. But as far as his skills and the development of the art of fighting, this was an enormous win for him and for all of those people that you mentioned. This is a real thing. You know what I mean? It's like people, this is a real thing. There's suddenly, in basketball, the three-point game, shooting from three-point is different because people kind of, somebody shifted it and the other people weren't ready for the shift. That's happening in fighting. Can it be solved? Of course. And could it be solved fairly quickly? Can we find answers? Yeah, it could happen. But right now, the game that the average fighter is not equipped to deal with, that certain people are too far ahead, is this game. The game of distance management and range control and forcing you to chase and intercepting you and manipulating, the space between two people and their weapons in each other's chins and bodies. That's the game right now. That's fighting right now. If people start studying that right now, it might not be. That's another one of the interesting things. A year from now, you spend a year working on this game. There's a solve. There's a quicker solve. There's a shift, seismic shift in how people fight, and you've wasted your time. And that goes for analyzing it too. I mean, the only thing that's constant in fighting, like most things in the world that we live in now, is change. So that's what I'm fascinated with, and that's what this fight was about tonight.
Last couple of questions, Robin, and we'll let you go because we know how busy you are. A lot of people sort of disappointed in a way because Lawler is fighting Woodley next and not Wonderboy. What do you think about this whole situation? Do you think it was a situation where Wonderboy just wasn't there at the right time? It was a timing situation. Yep. What do you think about the situation that we're in right now?
I do think that's exactly it, and I think if you are constantly changing, and if you're in a state of constant improvement, it doesn't matter. We're talking about fighting right now. We could apply this to your gardening company or an Etsy store that you have or anything in life. If you're in a constant state of innovation and improvement, if the timing isn't right, that's okay. All that's giving you is more time to keep getting better. And although there are so many variables, he could have lost tonight, but he didn't. He won. So, I think that, to me, the belt itself is also not as interesting as the development of the game. I know the belt is important to a lot of people. It's important to a lot of fighters. It's important to a lot of fans. But it's not important to the perspective that my personal perspective of fighting. And the guy that I think has some of the important abilities necessary and the complete game and enough of a rhythmic understanding of Wonderboy that could beat him is Carlos Condit. I don't know if Condit's fighting. I don't know if he wants to fight right now. I don't know if he's fighting not for a belt. I don't know if Wonderboy would fight not for a belt. But if you were to ask me, that's the fight I'd like to see. That's the fight that would push this limit of these concepts of fighting that are being tested in real time in the global experiment of fighting that is the UFC.
Robin, we could talk to you forever, but we know you've got a ton of stuff to do, guys. Don't forget to follow Robin Black on Twitter at Robin Black MMA, and of course, check out all his phenomenal breakdowns and chats on the Fight Network YouTube channel and on the Fight Network itself. You did a great one with Dan Hardy, and you've always got Faraz Sahabi and Brian Stan and plenty of other guys. Robin, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, my friends. It was fun talking to you guys, and thanks for mentioning my breakdowns. I got one coming out through the UFC on Cormier and Jones. It's supposed to be out maybe tonight or on the site, in the next few hours or tomorrow.
Nice.
And I'm going home to work on Brock Lesnar to have that out 10 days later.
That's exciting stuff.
It's a fun one.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much, Robin.
Thank you, Robin. Have a great one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, there you guys go. Robin Black. Great to have him on the show, especially because he's so busy, Cass. And he's always been so kind to us, taking his time, coming on the show, giving us his opinions, and always a very interesting perspective on a night of fights that, we really did need his perspective on, especially with that main event. Very interested to see what he had to say. I will say, though, because before we wrap up, I just want to give a couple of our thoughts on what sort of transpired. I will say it is an interesting situation that we find ourselves in with Lawler taking on Woodley. And it's not even though it's sort of soon, it's not even that soon in a lot of ways. And I feel like that the Thompson-Lawler fight, this is the fight that people want to see next. And it's just a shame because there's a lot of question marks up in the air. Lawler might fight Woodley, he might lose. Lawler might fight Woodley, he might get hurt. You never know what's going to happen. There could be a real delay with this fight. It's just a shame because there's a lot of question marks around it and a possibility, who knows what's going to happen in this MMA world. It could even not happen. So it's an interesting situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I think this Robbie Lawler versus Tyron Woodley one, I agree. When I first saw that Tyron Woodley was going to be challenging for the belt, and it's nothing personal against Tyron, but I just thought wow, really, of all the options, I mean, you got Damian Maia, you've got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I thought if anything, Wonderboy Thompson would be, the man for it. I think this is almost like a placeholder one. I think this is just, look, Robbie Lawler needs to fight. We need a pay-per-view main event. The title needs to be defended. Send in Robbie Lawler. Who do we pick? We'll do Tyron Woodley. I actually kind of think it's a good thing that the Stephen Wonderboy Thompson won, and now you've got a fresh new challenger. Because if you didn't, all right, you've still got Rory MacDonald, and that would have been a good rematch. But I think the MMA audience these days, they want something fresh and they want something new. A couple of quick things I'll mention though is, one, I feel like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson had a lot more momentum after he destroyed Johnny Hendricks, considering that Robbie Lawler wasn't able to finish him and Wonderboy was able to do it in one round. Now, you can look at other factors like, Johnny Hendricks was a changed fighter. He was afraid to pull the trigger. He was so focused on his diet. It was the first time that he wasn't training at Team Takedown, and he basically ran his own camp. And no one really does a great job in their first time out when they're with a new camp. And maybe that would be a completely different fight if they had a rematch. But it doesn't matter. The fight happened. He destroyed him. And I think that was the time to make that fight happen. And now you have Wonderboy Thompson beat Rory MacDonald. That's a great victory, and that's a huge victory over a massive, massive test. But let's not forget, Rory MacDonald got stopped by Robbie Lawler in, I believe, the fifth round when they fought. So I'm not saying he loses steam. I just don't think he's quite as hot. He's still hot, but I think he had more momentum, and I think people were a little bit more excited when he beat Johnny Hendricks.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting perspective. I mean, look, I think he's hotter than ever after this win. Just the fight itself, I mean, we didn't really get a chance to talk about it because Robin had a short amount of time, so we didn't get to get a chance to sort of share our opinions. But I was so impressed with the fact that Rory went in for that takedown at one point in the fight, and just the calmness and the fact that he was able to get out of that position, and the calmness when Rory rolled for those leg locks. I mean, I was really impressed with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. It was in a lot of ways a very different fighter from what we saw with Matt Brown. And I was just really impressed with how far he's come along. I mean, I guess it's a short and a long time depending on how you look at it. But I just thought back to when he first went in to the UFC and got that amazing KO win. And now we're looking at him. It took some time, but we saw an evolution of a fighter in front of our eyes. And you just see him. He's just in the right place in his career right now. And this is how long it's sort of taken to get into that place. I thought it was kind of cool.
Well, you're right, because Matt Brown was able to almost effortlessly, and it's one of those things where it's not really effortless, but because Matt Brown is so tough, he's able to make it look that way, but he was able to pressure Wonderboy Thompson, and in this case, Rory MacDonald, a guy who many would think has a much higher fight IQ, he had no success. Yeah, he had, flashes here and there, but essentially he wasn't able to pressure him, like Matt Brown was able to, and it does go to show just how much Wonderboy has improved. He is very much a complete fighter. He's got the counter wrestling these days. We know he's a phenomenal striker, and even training with Raymond Daniels, it didn't help. It didn't help Rory MacDonald at all. Here's the thing, though. I love that Wonderboy Thompson made the call out afterwards. It's something we hate seeing when fighters don't do a call out when they should. Not only did he call out the winner of Lawler and Woodley, he named the place, the time and place. He wants it in New York, UFC 205. And realistically, Lawler Woodley, I believe that is late July. I think July 30th.
July 30th, yeah.
And then UFC 205, which is New York, that's in November. So in theory, you should have a decent amount of time to make that fight. It is a few months. You could probably realistically make that fight. Who knows? They may want a bigger name in New York, but it could serve as potentially a co-main event. But here's the other interesting thing. Rory MacDonald, that's his last fight on his UFC contract. He wanted to go out on a big win and then try and get as much money or whatever it is that he wants, probably money, from the UFC. What happens to him now? You know, he's lost, and he would have had a lot of leverage if he won this fight because he would be the rightful number one contender, and he's the guy that you'd have to put in for a title shot. And if the UFC didn't want to pay up, or if he wasn't happy with the deal, he could go over to Bellator, and then the UFC would make, you know, the next title defense knowing that the rightful number one contender is off in another promotion. He doesn't have that leverage. What do you think about this whole situation, Dennis?
It's definitely very interesting now. I mean, the big question is, will Dana White and the UFC want to pay him the money that he thinks he deserves, or will they let Bellator give him an offer that he can consider? It's really tough to figure out because you're looking at a guy who has lost against the current champion and he's lost against Thompson. So you'd think in his near future, he's got a bit of work to do before he builds himself back up that ladder and gets another title shot. But then at the same time, he is young. And the youth is very important for the UFC in the division. He's obviously still a very good fighter. He's still got a lot of years left. It's not like one and done. He can still go in there and produce on a higher level. I guess it just depends on where the UFC see him as an asset or not. I know Bellator, guys like Scott Coker, I mean, you'd think right now they would be putting together the best deal they possibly could if they got an opportunity to present it to him. I mean, 26 years old, I don't think the UFC will let him go. I just have this feeling that, you know, he's done so much with the UFC, he's almost grown up in front of our eyes. I have a feeling they'll give him the offer that he's asking for so he doesn't go over to Bellator. But if they don't, no doubt about it, Scott Coker will give him whatever he wants just to go over to Bellator. He'll definitely give credibility to Bellator, the credibility that they need. And let's not forget, Kimbo Slice obviously tragically passed away, but Kimbo Slice was a big part of the Bellator marketing campaign. This was, you know, we're going to put on a Kimbo fight and draw 2 million viewers sort of marketing plan. And now that's all gone. So they got to start figuring out what they're going to do now. And yeah, Rory MacDonald was much needed in the company.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that Rory MacDonald will be able to go over in Bellator and be, you know, drawing 2 million views. But I mean, I think he's a huge asset. He's a cornerstone of the UFC's welterweight division. And it's a very easy to sell division. You know, we've seen divisions like, say, flyweight and even the lower weight classes are a bit tough to sell. Welterweight's a very relevant division. It's a division that can be appreciated by anybody. And Rory MacDonald, you know, he's an exciting fighter. You don't have to be a champion necessarily. We don't know whether he'll become a champion in the future or not. He may or may not. I definitely wouldn't close the book on him yet. But even if you're not a champion, you don't have to be to still be a huge part of a division. And you're right, Scott Coker would be chomping at the bit to actually get him in the company. I know that from what we've heard, the UFC, they like to give out these contracts where it's like, look, you earn a certain amount of money, but if you do become a champion, then you're guaranteed, all the stars in the world, you're guaranteed so much more money. And some fighters get put off by that. I think like a Benson Henderson who was like, you know what? That's great, but what if I don't become champion? I won't get that extra money, whereas Bellator, they like to offer their fighters a more sort of guaranteed contract. Mitrione, he said the same thing. So it's interesting what the UFC offered to him, and I think Rory MacDonald, he's at a place where it's not so much that he doesn't believe that he can be a champion, but I think with his daughter on the way, I think he's sort of going more the safer route. And he'd say, look, you know what? I'll take the guaranteed money. Again, that depends on what the UFC offer him. They may give him the guaranteed money that's already more than Bellator, but I think if it comes down to Bellator saying, hey, we'll give you $500,000, it's just a random number, I don't think they give him that, but we'll give you $500,000, and the UFC say, hey, we'll give you 200 guaranteed, and if you become a champion, you can have $1 million, I see Rory going to Bellator.
Oh, no doubt about it. And obviously Bellator picked up Benson Henderson, Josh Koscheck, they got Paul Daly there, but really they do need a bit more consistency in the welterweight division. And
he had legitimacy as well. Rory MacDonald.
Legitimacy. Also, media hasn't really been covering Bellator as much because they've had quite a few cards, but I just don't see them in the headlines as much anymore. So they need that person that, media will go down and cover, write articles about. And like I said, obviously, he's not going to draw 2 million, but with Kimbo Slice passing away, and obviously I think this whole Ken Shamrock thing is going out the window. Tito Ortiz looks like he just wants one last fight against Royce Gracie before he's done. They need to get some fighters that people know and care about to draw attention to their events. So, yeah, he would be a great example for that.
Yeah, for sure. I want to go back real quick. We're going to be wrapping up in just a second, but I want to Tarantino and go a little bit back through the card. Just mention Cerrone's win over Patrick Cote. I mean, just phenomenal the way he shut him down. I don't know the last time Cote's been dropped that badly. But to drop him, 3 times and then finish him, I can't understate what a huge feat that is to be the first man to legitimately stop him via strikes. And crazy when you consider the fact that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson fought Cote and he wasn't able to stop him. I mean, I feel like the sky's the limit now. Cerrone can pretty much do whatever he wants. And I'd love to see that Albertuminov fight, Dennis.
Yeah, the Albertuminov fight, great. Gunnar Nelson fight would be great. I guess the good thing about this welterweight division is he's fought so many of these lightweights that it sort of opens up a bunch of new, fresh matchups for us and gets us excited about him, headlining. And he will probably headline a lot of these fight night cards with a lot of these guys, maybe not at the top of the division, but because people love watching him fight, there's a lot of fun matchups in welterweight that he can go with. And who knows how he'll go. I mean, he may very well look like he looked today against all these guys. I mean, the big question is, and we won't get it answered until he builds up his wins and ends up in a position where he's going to have a title shot or an eliminator for a title shot, to see where he's at mentally. I mean, he mentioned post-fight that he felt like he got started a bit quicker now. Obviously, he's a notorious slow starter. The mental game has been a big issue for him. So, big win for him. I want to see how he progresses, and then I want to see how he does when he gets into one of those big stake situations, because obviously against Nate Diaz and RDA, he just has a bit of a tendency of sort of shutting down and not looking like the Cote of today. So I still think he has the potential to beat a bunch of dudes and end up in that situation again, but I'm very curious to see if he is able to look as good as he looked tonight in that situation.
Yeah, and the other thing I will say is this welterweight move, it has opened up possibilities, but it's still more like a placeholder. I do think Cerrone will be back down to 155, and I think he's kind of here to figure out what happens with the lightweight division. You've got RDA against Alvarez, you got Khabib waiting in the wings, you've got Tony Ferguson. You never know when and where Conor McGregor is going to, potentially move down to lightweight and challenge for the title. And I think once that all gets sorted out, because Cerrone's probably not going to be getting a rematch against RDA anytime soon. But him and Khabib, that's still a viable fight. Him and Tony Ferguson, that's still a viable fight. So I think the best thing for Cerrone would be if RDA was to lose that title. And against Khabib, that's a very real possibility. If that happens, then I would fully expect to see Donald Cowboy Cerrone back down to 155 and challenging for the title. So,
for sure. Even if Eddie Alvarez beats RDA, because obviously he's got to win over him. You'd imagine that he'll start campaigning for that. And that's the thing. People love to watch him fight. He pulls ratings. People love seeing him get in the octagon, and he loves being a late replacement. The UFC love him. There's a possibility if Alvarez wins and he has an opponent that gets injured, he could very well end up filling in last minute against him because he's really beaten him. So, the sky's the limit for him at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, that's enough from us, guys. We've been teasing this wrap-up for the last 10, 20 minutes. We're finally going to wrap up. We'll be back next week with a proper episode with multiple guests and everything. If you haven't gotten enough of your fix, or if you have enjoyed this, don't forget to check out on our YouTube channel. We did chat with Kareem Zidane of Bloody Elbow a little bit earlier. Just a phenomenal chat with amazing insight. We talked all about Fedor, the Maldonado fight, and Kareem, who has been traveling to Russia for the last God knows how long, and has spent a lot of time there, really opened our eyes and talked a lot about, just the situation in general in Russia and Dagestan, and experiences that he's had, and, shady practices and just a whole bunch, right, Dennis?
Yeah, no, that's right, Cass. I mean, look, this conversation with Kareem, we didn't know what to expect from it, but he really opened our eyes about a bunch of crazy topics. So even if you aren't that interested in the crazy world of Russian MMA, believe you me, you'll want to hear what Kareem has to say. It's a great listen. Check it out. Jump on YouTube channel, youtube.com/submissionreadyau. Leave us comments below. And Casper, I mean, the big news is we will be trying to do a vlog, or we will be doing a vlog for our time in Vegas. We're not sure at the moment about the frequency of them. We're looking at highlights from our days. But if you have an activity that you want to see me and Casper do in Vegas and include it in the vlog, throw your suggestions below. We're going to start building the suggestions up, and when we get time, because we're going to be super busy, obviously doing all the media over there in Vegas. But the good idea is if we can get it in the vlog, us doing some fun activities over in Vegas, put them below. We're looking for some fun things to do and show you guys how it's done.
Yeah, for sure. Till then, guys, we'll catch you next week.